Ladies and gentlemen, my name is John McKenna. I write a book called The Irish Food Guide. When I started writing it in 1989, the book was 200 pages long. When I produced the last edition last November, it was 700 pages long. That's 100 pages longer than the 210 edition. That was 100 pages longer than the 2007 edition. Okay, so the growth in specialty food in Ireland over the last 23 years has been absolutely extraordinary. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you to the Northern Ireland Tourist Board for asking me. I'm going to make a confession. I'm particularly delighted to be here because the last time I spoke in Northern Ireland, Will was there, several years ago, was the most depressing experience I ever had in my history of writing about food in Ireland. It was the worst. It was heartbreaking. It was a bunch of lovely producers saying to the man from the big supermarket, "Why do the guys in Scotland get more for their beef cattle than we do? Ours is better." And of course what they got in return for their very fair question was nothing but a series of platitudes, and everybody went home thoroughly depressed. Before we went home thoroughly depressed, we had some incredibly depressing hotel food to eat in the really depressing hotel. And I went back to Belfast. In those days you could fly from Cork to Belfast. So I went back to Belfast and to get the plane, and I thought, what on earth am I going to do? And I went to the Mourne Seafood Bar, and Andy Ray saved my life. Andy Ray is one of the great cooks. And the food in the Mourne, I thought, okay, whatever the other problems are, Northern Ireland has some of the greatest cooks in Europe. Dead simple. And all you've got to do is walk through the door of the Mourne Seafood Bar, and you're going to be saved. And I went home pretty happy. But the message I took away from that day was otherwise not very good. Even with the knowledge I had of all the good people in Northern Ireland doing good things, the overall picture really seemed very, very bad. So I want to tell you that from today in particular, just before I finish that point, I'm looking forward to Adrian's television show when it happens on BBC Northern Ireland. If I was a TV producer, it's a 6-parter just to start, right? I'm sure his agent is somewhere in the room. I particularly want to say thank you to Richard. I have spent nearly 25 years saying to people in certain parts of the country, do you know what's one of your specialities around here? And they say, potatoes, Westmeath, we love potatoes. I live near Kilcrohan in West Cork. It's about 15 minutes from where I live. We have the first early potatoes in Ireland. We have the early daffodils, and we have the early potatoes. Now, there's two things worth celebrating, right? And West Cork is the engine that built specialty food in Ireland. So I live 15 minutes away from a little village that has two of the great specialities. Okay, daffodils is related, but hey, a little bit of yellow color when the snow is on the ground, fantastic. Do we have a food festival to celebrate the first early spuds from Kilcrohan? We do not. Do they have a food festival in Westmeath to celebrate the spuds? They do not. They have a potato museum in Sligo. Do they have a festival to celebrate the variety of potatoes you can grow in Ireland? They do not. Cumber has done it. That's going to be at a major event on the 22nd of June, I think. And a huge thing for Northern Ireland to celebrate. I was reared on Cumber spuds. They're wonderful. To get the PGI is absolutely extraordinary. You are way ahead of anybody else in the whole country in managing to achieve these things. What looked hopeless to me 6 years ago now seems to me that there's a dynamic here which is nothing short of extraordinary. You know, I mean, somebody needs to understand that Michelle has taken a 2.5 billion industry and raised it to 4 billion in 5 or 6 years. If she was an American CEO, she'd be on about 27 million a year. She'd make Phil Mickelson look poor. She'd be so well remunerated. Poor Phil. 47 million a year, and he's unhappy. I mean, Matthew has outlined there an awful lot of the practical steps, and you saw the bottom line. You know, and the bottom line is absolutely vitally important, and good food provides the bottom line. So what we want to try to talk about is, if we get the machine to work, how are we doing, lads? Okay, so I write the Irish Food Guide, and the plaques that you may have seen this in Will's talk, We offer these to people who are, you have to be included in the food guide. You have to be good enough to get in the food guide. This is the brand new 2013 plaque. In 23 years, I have seen food tourism grow from being zero to being a hero, really. Because food tourism attracts the kind of tourists you want. Hen parties are fine up to a certain point. But as they've discovered in Temple Bar in Dublin, there's a certain level of people throwing up against the wall that suddenly is not very good, okay? Which is unfortunate. Now, I want you to take in this figure. This is not a mistake, okay? This is not a mistake. You're probably looking at that and saying, no, there's too many zeros there. Noma is the most famous restaurant in the world in Copenhagen. René Redzepi's restaurant is, for the last 3 years, has been voted the #1 restaurant in the world. Now, you can take that with a pinch of salt. I used to vote in those awards, and I used to vote for Irish restaurants, and the Irish restaurants never featured. Of course they didn't, because it was only me and 2 other dudes in Ireland voting for Irish restaurants. Nevertheless, there aren't a whole lot of food hacks in Copenhagen or in Denmark, so Redzepi actually is worth the #1 slot, right? So I just want you to take in that figure. Noma, now remember, before Redzepi, nobody ever went to Denmark to eat. When Redzepi found himself as a chef, he had to go on a voyage to get ingredients. He didn't go and drive. He got on a bloody boat, and he went up all around the Arctic seas trying to find stuff. So there was no food culture in Denmark whatsoever. Redzepi invented it, and he is one of the greatest salesmen in history. And now you know what the worst job in the world is. The person who handles the reservations in Noma. 100,000 requests for a table in Noma every single month. Noma does about 50 covers each sitting. I have never come across a stat like that in all my life. Redzepi admitted that to the New York Times about 3 months ago. But so at the same time as this person has invented what we now call the new Nordic cuisine, he is having that number of requests. In addition to being the most famous chef in the world, there's now a whole slew of guys behind him. The next biggest guy you're going to hear an awful lot about is Magnus Nielsen from Favaken, which is a Swedish restaurant. But there's a whole lot of them. So Redzepi is the driver, and that is what food achieves. Before Noma, nobody went to Copenhagen to eat. You went to do other things, but you didn't go to eat. So, how do you get there? You've got to look both inside and you've got to look outside. Doing one or other is not actually enough. The thing about looking inside, and we saw it with lunch, is what is obvious to you is unique to somebody else. Fudge. Nowhere else has fudge. Boxty is probably the rarest cooked food in Europe. It's only found, it actually respects counties. You'll find it in Fermanagh, and it doesn't exist in Sligo. Why not? I don't know. All I know is that that's what it happens. That's really something to celebrate. So it is. So that's the key thing to kind of remember. Especially in a homogenized world when so much of what people eat is the same. I was over in Mexico just a couple of weeks ago, went to a supermarket, which is a bit sad, but that's what you do when you're a food writer. You go off to kayak and you wind up looking at what's in the supermarket. And all the breakfast cereals in the world are all the same. Did you know that? It's absolutely extraordinary. All the toiletries are the same. A huge amount of the dairy products, and I want to talk about milk a little bit later, are all the same. I was in this supermarket in La Paz in Baja, and I felt like I was in kind of, I don't know, somewhere in Longford or somewhere like that, So the point is, the greater point of differentiation, the more it's special to the visitor. And let's see if we can just move on now a little bit. And the key to that is provenance. Now, that phrase there, milk is a magic liquid, I wish I'd said it, but I didn't. It was written by a gentleman who wrote a book on the history of Camembert about 15 years ago. But the extraordinary thing about milk is this. Northern Ireland used to have a strange regime about milk whereby you had to sell all your milk to the milk marketing board. And then they then made milk and yogurt and butter and so on and so forth. Nobody was allowed to be different. We copied this in Ireland. Tony O'Reilly came up with Kerrygold. Okay, so we homogenized everything. But milk doesn't really behave like that. Milk is a magic liquid because every milk from every cow is different from every other cow, because every pasture is different. And it's when you realize not the homogeneity of milk, but the heterogeneity of milk, in other words, its difference, that you build its value. I have seen a small farm about 5 miles from where I live in West Cork, Glenillan Dairies, possibly make the best butter in Northern Europe, with all due exceptions to the wonderful Abernethys, which is terrific, right? Glenillan has grown from a farm whose story was the man from Chagas, the agricultural advisor, would come along and he'd say, "You've no money. Rationalize." And they rationalized and rationalized till they couldn't rationalize anymore. And then they stopped rationalizing, and they realized that she was a dairy scientist and he was a milk farmer, and they started producing. I would have bought some of their very first yogurt and butter, unwrapped, unmarked, and to be honest, between ourselves, and I know you will never tell this to anybody else outside this room, not that good. 15 years ago in the boys' club in Bantry, right? That industry now, that farm is now still a farm business on the farm worth several millions per year and employing more than 40 people in the little village of Drimoleague, which, God love it, doesn't have a whole lot else. So milk can be multiplied out in infinite ways, and that's the way you need to think about products. Don't just look at a pig and think pig. A smart person looks at a pig, and do you know what they actually see? An ATM on 4 legs, right? Because a pig is just pure money from nose to tail, so long as you don't see it as a commodity. Commodity farming kills agriculture because it disrespects the farmer and it disrespects the terroir. And I mean, you heard Richard talking about there about the terroir of the Cumber potatoes. That is the strength. And that is what people will pay for, and they will pay any amount of money for it. You can make sparkling wine all over the world that's as good as champagne. Who gets the big money? Are you going to get a bottle of Krug in the supermarket for €25? Not a chance. Because it's from Champagne and it's the highest mark. So that's what you pay for. So milk is just an example. Milk has all this magic. You can make it into cheese, you can make it into yogurt, you can make it into quark, you can do a gazillion things with it. It's when you stop seeing it as milk and start making it into Glastery Farm ice cream that you have a brand and a product and a history and a heritage and a succession and all of those things that make a food culture really, really valuable. Let's see if we can get the next one now. As Matthew said, you must respect your counties and you must respect your colleagues. You've got to work with other people, right? Does anybody know Harry's restaurant at Bridgend in County Donegal, just across the border from Derry? Do you know Bridgend? Bridgend is one of those places that you blink and you miss it, and it's advisable to blink in order to miss it, okay? It looks like an extended trailer park, and if you look at it, you say, why would anybody ever come here? Again, you might have thought I had added an extra 0 to that figure. No, 2,500 customers a week go to Donald Doherty's restaurant. Why do they go to Donald Doherty's restaurant? What did he do? He's an accountant who took over a failing family restaurant. So what did he do? Quite simple. He said, where are we? Inishowen. Where's all my food going to come from? Inishowen. All he serves is Inishowen food. He buys more Gurnard from the Greencastle boats than anybody else in Ireland. Anybody else in Ireland. People will tell you Irish people don't eat fish. Everybody who goes to Harry's eats fish because it's straight off the boats from Greencastle into Harry's and onto your plate at a very good price. He has farmers growing. All his animals that are on his menus are outdoor animals grown specifically for him. He has a wonderful organic farmer, Dermot Carey, growing in walled gardens that he was given. The person said, I've got a big walled garden, I'm not using it, you use it. So when you go to Harry's and Bridgend, you eat Inishowen food, not just from Donald Doherty. He doesn't produce anything. He orchestrates. He's the conductor of the symphony of producers in Inishowen, and that's his genius. And his reward is 2,500 customers a week. If there's any restaurateurs here who would be happy with 2,500 customers a week, you need to get over and see what this man is doing because it's really quite extraordinary and quite delicious, I should say. You know, you need to look at things as being centers of excellence. And Northern Ireland has excelled at this in many areas. If I could just mention one thing. A book I'd kind of love to write if I ever get the time for it would be of the alumni of Roscoff Restaurant in the early 1990s, if people can remember that restaurant, from a period in early 1991, right? Noel McNeil's in the kitchen, Nevin Maguire's in the kitchen, Eugene Callahan's in the kitchen, Robbie Miller's in the kitchen, Shirley Miller's out front, now McKenna's in the kitchen. Unbelievable. There has never been an alumni like that restaurant in Irish restaurant history. But Paul and Jeannie aren't alone. Michael Dean has educated great chefs. Nick Price has educated great chefs. And they've done it because they saw their places as centers of excellence. Not just as places where you sell people food and make money, but where you bring on the next talent. And so Robbie Miller goes on to Shanks, and Noel McNeil goes on to here, and Nevin Maguire. You can't get into Nevin Maguire's restaurant in Black Lion and Cavan. Black Lion, like Bridgend, blink, you threw it, you missed it. You can't get in there. If you ring up today and say, can I book a Saturday night for my wife, and we'd like to have dinner in a room for two, you might get in September, but you might not. Might be November. So that's what food does. Nevin Maguire used to fill every B&B room in Black Lion. He now has 17 rooms in a little small kind of hotel himself. Extraordinary young man, and he's done it. But what do you already do in Northern Ireland? You know, I often think there should be a sausage trail here. You have the greatest sausage makers in Northern Europe. Not just McCartney's, Burns, all the other guys. Exceptional, extraordinary standards. An extraordinary sense of competition amongst them. Celebrating the Cumber potato. It's already happened. Hey, what was I doing while these guys were out having potato festivals? Waiting for somebody to do it. And it's done, it's happening. Reimagining the Ulster fry. The Ulster fry is a really, really great dish. But there's an awful lot of people who will say, hang on now, not first thing in the morning. So people need to think about these things. You know, René Redzepi didn't just serve Danish food. If he served Danish food, nobody would go to Copenhagen. In El Bulli, Ferran Adria did not serve Spanish food. He said, this is my food. This is my food interpreted through Catalan, through Spanish, through molecular cuisine, and so on. Spain, remember, there's been a war going on between Spain and France for years, undeclared. 30 years ago, France was the undisputed champion of gastronomy in the world. Is there anybody in this room who's gone to France in the last 10 years to eat? Where do you go? There's a brave lady. You don't go there anymore. You go to Spain. You go to Copenhagen. You go to Sydney. You go to New York. You go to London. You go to San Francisco. The French lost the war, and the Zeitgeist moved across the Pyrenees for reasons I'll deal with, I think, in a second. So you have the centers of excellence, but sometimes you need to reimagine actually what you can do with them. Let's go on here a little bit if we can. Now, if that's the looking inside at where the excellence is and what the uniqueness is that you actually have, you need to also look outside. So here's a little thing. This is a list that was in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago, okay, of the 10 hottest food trends that are happening in America throughout cutting-edge American cuisine. Long-aged meat. Anybody want to guess how long they're talking about when we're talking about long-aged meat? I mean, we're all familiar with 21 days, 28 days, 35 days. What are we talking about here when we're talking about long-aged meat? Have a guess. Anybody? 50. Sorry? 50. Can't hear? 50. 50? Not even close. The year is getting close. We're talking about, did somebody say 240? 240 days, aged beef. Now, I know what you're going to say to me. Northern Irish restaurateurs are going to say, my environmental health officer is going to walk in the door, and it's going to be hell. Okay, we'll deal with that later. 240 days, okay? Smoked everything, smoked cheeses, smoked yogurt, smoked butter, whatever you can get. And different woods to smoke it with, okay? Sunflower power, sunflower seeds, sunflower petals, sunflower whatever you name. Sunflower chokes in soups and everything. Artisanal soft serve. Glastonbury Farm now will be following this up. Places like Momofuku Milk Bar, caramel, pistachio, soft serve ice creams. Really weird, funky, far out flavors in soft serve, right? Not hard serve, in soft serve. That's the dynamic. Where else are we then now? Chicharrones. What is a chicharrone? A chicharrone is a piece of fried pork fat What are Hannans already doing? Making guanciale and winning national awards for it. Hannans don't need to learn from the New York Times, guys. They're way ahead of them. Leave the fried pork fat to the Mexicans. They're making Northern Ireland guanciale, and it's just an incredible thing to do. Raw winter vegetables. This in the United States is the kale thing, always eating kale in wintertime. But why not? Whatever you're doing, you're trying to push the barrel. And you're trying to look outside and say, well, what are they doing? What are they doing? Barrel-aged hot sauces. We don't really kind of use hot sauces so much here. But even with things like hot sauces, ubiquitous with barbecues and Mexican food and so on, you're talking about trying to make them different, aged for different periods of time in different woods. Pig's tails. Unbelievable. You know, the pig's tail actually gets fashionable. Fermentation is the single hottest topic in modern cutting-edge gastronomy, right? It is the area that chefs are most excited by. We've already had fermentation here today. Punjana tea is fermented, okay? One of the reasons why fermentation is so interesting, I might propose, is the big coming story with food and health is about what we call the gut biome. In other words, about the bacteria in you that defines you, but that if you take too many antibiotics, you kill it off, and so on and so forth. Fermentation is about breeding good bacteria. It's about making your own sauerkraut. It's about making your own kimchi. It's about making your own yogurts, and about a multiplicity of things. I know the environmental health officer is at the door right now and wants to see what you've got in that Kilner jar. We'll deal with that in a second. Salume 2, the second generation of salamis. I'm sorry, McCartney's are already there. Silver side of corned beef and believe me, to win the supreme prize at the Great Taste Awards really means something. It really, really means something. I mean, you were talking about, it used to be 7,000 products, now it's in excess of 8,000 products. To come out of the top of that is simply extraordinary. So McCartney's are already at Salume 2. So, you know, you might look at this and say, oh, that's for New York or that's for San Francisco. You're already there, which is incredible. Now, one other thing, just to kind of go sideways then. Again, I haven't made this up. I learned this last year at a conference in Mayo. The world is full of people who run marathons and triathletes, and in Europe, they on average earn $160,000 a year. So the guy with the average car and the $5,000 bike on the back is somebody you really need to look after. These people travel to take part in events. The Belfast Marathon, the Dublin Marathon, the New York Marathon, the Shanghai Marathon, you name it, whatever it is. This trike across the Sierra, whatever. They will go anywhere that there's a challenge, and they are well-heeled, and they want to be well-fed. Again, that seems like an extraordinary figure. It's not. And it's the kind of tourist in the future that you want to have coming to Northern Ireland and saying, I want to run this marathon. I want to walk this pathway. It's all fine to concentrate on the golfers, but don't forget about the other guys. Now, the interesting thing about all of this, and one of the reasons why I mentioned the triathlete, is I think one of the things that was so depressing when I was talking 6 years ago or 7 years ago was the feeling that there was just a pyramid in Northern Ireland, and that was your food culture. And up top here is the man in the supermarket, and he's telling everybody down here at the bottom how much you can have. Right? That doesn't work. That's the Sun King. Okay, the Sun King at the top tells the peasant at the bottom, you're this valuable. No good. You go into the St. George's Market on a Saturday morning, what do you see? You see what we call a meshwork, right? It's like when you have a good Aran Island sweater and it keeps the rain out. It also makes you far too hot in modern climates, but anyway, that's another story. Or the alpaca sweater. A meshwork is equals working together. And that's an incredibly strong concept. You cannot, look at this, I'm trying as hard as I cannot pull my fingers apart. That's not true, but anyway. The meshwork of equal people on the ground working together is a meshwork, is a composite of equals, and it works, not a pyramid. So everybody is a player. So what do you need with great food? You need the hiking trails. You need the concerts and the festivals. You need kayaking. I'm a very bad kayaker, but I love it. You need the marathons and the triathlons, because they attract tens of thousands of people. I remember being in Dublin a couple of years ago and going down in a very nice house that we feature in our books and sitting down to breakfast. And all of a sudden, about 40 people turned up all at the same time. Now, anybody who runs a hospitality establishment knows that that does not happen in Ireland, right? Unless breakfast stops at 10 o'clock. and then 40 people turn up at 9:59, okay? Apart from that, this wasn't 9:59, this was like 8 a.m., and 40 people turned up. They were all there to run the Dublin Marathon, all of them. That was one house, one night, okay? You need the gardens to visit. You need places where the birders can go. You need nature, pure nature. Not manicured nature, not nature with too many, little bits and pieces and centers and so on and so forth. Nature as it is. You need the museums and the galleries. When I was looking at this, and I was working on the presentation with Sally, my wife, a couple of days ago, and I said, there's something I'm forgetting here. I'm definitely missing out on something. What is it? And of course, you'll all guess it, what I've missed here. Surfing. Surfing is huge in the Republic. Right? If we all went off to Lahinch now, you would not believe the amount of kite surfers you would see in Lahinch. And you sort of say, hang on a minute, Lahinch is for golfers. Lahinch is for kite surfers. Right? Surfing is huge. If you have the waves, you get the surfers. They have the waves in County Clare, they have the waves in County Kerry, they get the surfers. Surfers are cool. That's what you need along with the really, really good food. Let's just move on now. I'm going. What does it mean if you have a walking? The Mulroney Park Hotel is a very, very nice hotel just as the mainland ends before you get onto Achill Island. A few years ago, on an old railway track, they set up the Gourmet Greenway. It went from just being a number of kind of hospitality providers on this little track that you could walk and cycle. The second wave of it has added, along with food producers, has added the kayakers, the kite surfers, the windsurfers, and so on and so forth. The Mulroney Park added 1,000 extra bed nights because of the Gourmet Greenway, just like that. It's the hotel for where it begins and ends, and it was their initiative, 1,000 bed nights in one small boutique hotel alone. What do you have to do to get there? One of the issues about food in Northern Ireland is the feeling that it has to be intensively regulated. That somehow a farm industry isn't as good as an industry that's in an industrial park, which is where everything comes from stainless steel. You cannot get uniqueness in artisan food unless you respect terroir, unless you respect the walls. If these walls help my cheese to mature, then you can't move me from here to an industrial park, because the thing that makes my cheese unique will be gone. Bacteria. I'm talking about bacteria again. When people talk about terroir and other things, we're really essentially talking about bacteria, but bacteria is uniqueness. So there needs to be, because I've heard so many difficult stories about environmental health officers, there needs to be a new understanding on their part. For 100 years now, we've lived in the Pasteur age. Bacteria is to be killed, okay? We pasteurize milk, we kill bacteria, we're all healthy. No, we're not. This is why I mentioned that fermentation is so important now, because the gut biome is one of the defining things of our health. It's one of the things that people now suspect is a major player in the obesity epidemic. What you don't have in your gut is the ability to fight obesity. So you may not be eating too much, you may not be doing anything wrong, but you may still be putting on weight. It could be down to your gut biome. So we need a new understanding on the part of the state that the terroir, the walls, the bugs, the uniqueness, the on-farm production is good for all of our health. The EHOs need to understand that if I have Kilner jars of my kimchi here, kimchi is, of course, is a fiery cabbage condiment, which is the signature of Korean food. It's Korean sauerkraut, right? And it's quite delicious, and you should all make your own because it's really fabulous. But the EHO needs to understand that in my restaurant, if I've got Kilner jars of kimchi, they are good, they are not bad. So you need collaboration. Confrontation is no good. We need a new scientific understanding of what it actually means. In order to get to where you need to be, where you're already going at breakneck speed, you have to oppress the opinion makers. You want to be in the New York Times. The New York Times picked Ireland as one of its hot destinations for 2013 because of the gathering. Now, why didn't it pick Derry as a city of culture? Because you're not getting the message out enough. You know, those magazines, Condé Nast Traveller, whatever it may be, are all looking for the hot new thing. Every journalist, I write journalism, not on as much as I used to, but I still do some. Every journalist doesn't want the story that somebody else has had. I want the story before everybody else gets it. So How do you get it? Unique food and service wins critical regard. Critical regard is it, really. That's how you get 100,000 reservation requests in Noma, because everybody says nobody else cooks like Red Zeppi. If anybody is as old as me and can remember what it was like, for example, to eat in Roscoff in 1992, when you could hardly get a table there, it was simply unbelievable. And it was all through critical regard that they won early on. If you get the critical regard, you get the column inches, and you can't buy that. You cannot pay for it. As Matthew said, when you're on the television, when you're in the BBC, you can't pay for that because they won't take your money. They don't care about money. That is independent. It's the same as the books I write. You can't pay me to be in a book. You're either good enough to be in the book, and if you're not in the book. I'm not going to criticize you. You're just not a player, so you're not going to be in the book. Okay? So the critical regard precedes the column inches. The column inches, it follows on then that the triathlete says, you know, there's the North Down, whatever it may be, triathlon, and that's mine one for this year. Because they want the cool new triathlons as well, or the marathons, or whatever it may be. So you must impress the opinion makers. And that means showing them the whole cultural picture. You know, you can't just do the old kind of thing that people used to do 25 years ago in journalism. It's just take a whole bunch of people and feed them a whole lot of food at breakfast, then a whole lot of food at lunch, then a whole lot of food at dinner, and then they say, what are we doing tomorrow? And you say, well, actually, we're going to feed you a whole lot of food at breakfast, and then we're going to feed you a whole lot of food at lunch, and then we're going to feed you a whole lot of food at dinner. Doesn't work. But if you can take them out for a hike, or a marathon, or kayaking, or foraging, then you have their interest. What I'm saying, and I couldn't have said it 6 years ago, and I'm so happy to be saying it today, is you have everything you need, and it seems to me you were all singing from the same hymn sheet, which is the remarkable thing. Because 6 years ago, I was incredibly, really, really heartbroken, actually, as somebody from Northern Ireland, to see a picture that was just so depressing. And then to come here today and to have the chance to speak to you, but above all, to listen to what I've heard today is simply remarkable. Because it seems to me that people are saying, I mean, I'm not just mentioning Will here, but, you know, but maybe with the ice cream makers, but not just the ice cream makers. Northern Ireland has cheese makers it never had before. These things are vitally, vitally, vitally important. They are your superstars. The first time I ever saw Ferran Adria over in San Sebastian in Spain, and he came out on stage with a whole bunch of chefs. Do you know what they were like? They were like the Barcelona football team. It weren't just, oh, here's a superstar chef, here's a 3-star chef, here's a 2-star chef, here's a 1-star. It was like, we are a team. Adria was the captain, right? But that's all he was. He was the captain of the team. And all they were doing every day of the week was beating the French 7-0. Okay? So you need more markets. You have a very exciting new generation of chefs. In the new Irish Food Guide, I've kind of described them as the third wave of chefs I've seen. Because, I mean, there was the original chefs with, you know, Paul and Michael and Nick. And then the second generation, now McKenna, Brian McCann, Danny Miller, many others. And now there's the third generation, and Will Brown in the Schoolhouse, for example. Just an example, Ian Brown over in Derry. There's a third wave now of chefs, which is really so exciting. So you have all that you need to achieve what you want to achieve. And you can make it work, and you're already doing so. So thank you very much indeed for the invitation, and it's been a pleasure and a privilege.